The courthouse steps were crowded that Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. Sarah Chen adjusted her navy blazer and checked her watch. As a civil rights attorney, she had walked these same steps hundreds of times. But today felt different. Today, she was testifying in a case that would change everything about how the legal system viewed self-defense. 3 months earlier, Sarah had been just another lawyer rushing between court appearances. She specialized in workplace discrimination cases and had built a solid reputation defending employees against powerful corporations. At 32, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight build that made most people underestimate her completely. What they couldn't see was the years of martial arts training that had become her refuge from the stress of legal practice. Sarah had started taking karate classes in college after a frightening encounter in a parking garage. What began as a safety measure evolved into a passion. She earned her black belt in Shotokan karate, then added Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Krav Maga to her skills. Her instructors often said she possessed an unusual combination of technical precision and explosive power. But Sarah never imagined she would need these skills outside the controlled environment of a dojo. The morning that changed her life started like any other. Sarah arrived at the Maricopa County Superior Court building at 7:30, planning to review case files before her 9 o'clock hearing. The building was nearly empty except for security guards and a few early arriving court staff. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, where her client was scheduled to give a deposition in a sexual harassment case against a major construction company. Marcus Delgado had been harassing female employees at Southwest Construction for months. The company's human resources department had ignored multiple complaints, and 3 women had finally decided to file a lawsuit. Sarah represented Jennifer Martinez, a 24-year-old crane operator who had been subjected to increasingly aggressive behavior from Delgado, a site foreman with connections to company management. What Sarah didn't know was that Delgado had spent the previous evening drinking and plotting revenge against what he called troublemaking lawyers who don't mind their own business. He had arrived at the courthouse an hour before Sarah, having learned her schedule from courthouse records that were publicly available. Delgado was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. His criminal background included 2 assault convictions and a restraining order violation, facts that would later become crucial to the case. The 4th floor hallway was deserted when Sarah stepped off the elevator. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floor. Sarah's heels clicked rhythmically as she walked toward conference room 4B, where the deposition was scheduled to take place. She carried a leather briefcase in her right hand and a large coffee in her left, thinking about the questions she planned to ask during the morning's proceedings. Delgado had been waiting behind a maintenance door near the elevators. As Sarah passed, he stepped out silently. She sensed movement behind her and started to turn, but Delgado moved quickly for such a large man. He grabbed her left shoulder with his massive hand, spinning her around violently. The coffee cup flew from her grasp, splashing hot liquid across the wall. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Delgado snarled, his breath reeking of alcohol from the night before. His grip on Sarah's shoulder tightened painfully. "You lawyers think you can ruin a man's life and just walk away." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She recognized the signs of an imminent attack and began calculating her options. Delgado outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, and his position behind her left shoulder gave him a significant mechanical advantage. But Sarah had spent years learning to overcome larger opponents through technique and timing. "Let go of me right now," Sarah said firmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You're violating the restraining order that was issued last month." Delgado laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "What restraining order? I don't see any cops around here. Just you and me having a little conversation about how you're going to drop this case." Sarah felt his grip shift as he prepared to grab her with both hands. She knew she had maybe 2 seconds before he escalated to serious violence. Her briefcase was still in her right hand, but dropping it would telegraph her intentions. Instead, she used it as a counterweight, shifting her stance slightly to improve her balance. "I'm giving you one last chance to walk away," Sarah said, her tone now carrying the authority she used in courtrooms. "Security cameras are recording everything you're doing right now." This was actually true. The courthouse had installed new surveillance equipment 6 months earlier following a series of incidents involving angry litigants. For cameras covered this particular hallway from different angles, though Sarah couldn't be sure if anyone was monitoring the feeds at this early hour. Delgado's face darkened with rage. "I don't care about cameras. By the time security gets here, you'll understand what happens to lawyers who mess with the wrong people." He released her shoulder and reached around with both arms, trying to trap her in a bear hug from behind. This was exactly the type of attack Sarah had trained to counter hundreds of times. As his arms closed around her torso, she dropped her briefcase and grabbed his right wrist with both hands. The next 3 seconds would be replayed on courthouse security footage and analyzed frame by experts from both sides. What the cameras captured was a textbook demonstration of leverage overcoming brute strength, executed with a precision that stunned everyone who later viewed the recording. Sarah dropped her weight and stepped back into Delgado's stance, using his forward momentum against him. She rotated his captured wrist clockwise while stepping to her left, creating a joint lock that immediately compromised his balance. Delgado, caught off guard by her speed and technical skill, tried to muscle out of the hold by yanking his arm away. This was his fatal mistake. Sarah had anticipated exactly this reaction and was already transitioning to a more severe technique. As Delgado pulled back, she maintained her grip on his wrist while pivoting sharply. Her left hand found the back of his elbow, and she applied pressure in opposite directions. The sound of Delgado's radius bone snapping was clearly audible on the security footage, though the cameras couldn't capture the sickening sensation Sarah felt through her hands as the fracture occurred. Delgado's scream of pain echoed through the empty hallway, a sound that would haunt Sarah's dreams for months afterward. But the injury was even more severe than it initially appeared. The force of Delgado's resistance, combined with Sarah's precise application of leverage, had created what orthopedic surgeons would later describe as a complex spiral fracture. The radius bone had broken in 2 places, with bone fragments damaging surrounding muscles and ligaments. Delgado collapsed to his knees, cradling his shattered arm against his chest. His face had gone white with shock, and he was no longer capable of continuing any attack. Sarah released her grip and stepped back, her own hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline surge. "Security!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "Medical emergency on the 4th floor." Within minutes, the hallway filled with courthouse security officers, paramedics, and curious court staff who had heard Delgado's screams. The lead security officer, a retired police detective named Frank Morrison, immediately secured the scene and began interviewing witnesses. What Morrison discovered changed everything. The security system had not only recorded the entire incident from multiple angles, but the timestamps showed that Sarah had been attacked without provocation. More importantly, 14 people had witnessed at least part of the encounter from various locations throughout the building. 3 janitors working on the 3rd floor had heard the commotion and arrived in time to see Sarah defending herself. 2 court clerks entering the building had observed Delgado following Sarah to the elevator. A federal marshal conducting an early morning security sweep had witnessed the initial confrontation through a window. Even a news reporter arriving to cover an unrelated trial had captured part of the incident on his smartphone. By the time paramedics loaded Delgado into an ambulance bound for emergency surgery, Sarah found herself surrounded by witnesses, court officials, and investigators. The case that was supposed to be about workplace harassment had suddenly become something much larger and more complex. Detective Lisa Rodriguez from the Phoenix Police Department arrived 30 minutes later to take Sarah's statement. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who specialized in assault cases, and she had rarely seen such clear-cut evidence of justified self-defense. "Ms. Chen," Rodriguez said as they sat in the courthouse security office, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened from the moment you got off the elevator." Sarah took a deep breath and began recounting the morning's events, knowing that her words would be scrutinized by lawyers, judges, and media outlets for months to come. She had successfully defended herself against a dangerous attacker, but now she faced a different kind of battle entirely. The legal system that Sarah knew so well was about to judge her actions with the same careful attention to detail that she brought to her own cases. And as news of the incident spread through the courthouse, Sarah realized that her life as a quiet civil rights attorney was over forever. Detective Lisa Rodriguez spent the next 6 hours collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. What she discovered painted a picture of calculated stalking that had led to a violent confrontation. The security footage from 17 different cameras throughout the courthouse created a timeline that left no doubt about Marcus Delgado's intentions. The first camera caught Delgado entering the building at 6:45 in the morning, 45 minutes before Sarah arrived. He had waited in the lobby, pretending to read newspapers while watching the elevator bank. When Sarah entered, Delgado followed her to the elevators, but took the stairs to the 4th floor, arriving several minutes before her. Camera footage from the stairwell showed Delgado pacing nervously on the 4th floor landing, checking his watch repeatedly. He had clearly planned this encounter, choosing a location and time when the courthouse would be nearly empty. The premeditation element would later become crucial to the prosecution's case against him. Dr. Patricia Williams, the emergency room physician who treated Delgado at Phoenix General Hospital, provided Rodriguez with a detailed medical report that shocked even experienced investigators. The spiral fracture had required 4 hours of surgery to repair, with surgeons installing 2 titanium plates and 8 screws to hold the bone fragments in place. "I've seen similar injuries in motorcycle accidents and industrial equipment malfunctions," Dr. Williams told Rodriguez during a phone interview. "The amount of force required to create this type of fracture is considerable, but the precision of the break suggests someone with extensive knowledge of joint manipulation and leverage." Physical therapist James Murphy, who would later treat Delgado during his recovery, explained the long-term consequences of the injury. "This wasn't just a simple broken bone," Murphy said. "The damage to surrounding ligaments and muscles means he'll never have full use of that arm again. He'll probably lose about 30% of his grip strength permanently." Meanwhile, Courthouse Security Chief Frank Morrison was conducting his own investigation into how Delgado had gained access to information about Sarah's schedule. What he discovered revealed a pattern of stalking behavior that had been going on for weeks. Delgado had visited the courthouse 11 times in the previous month, using his status as a party in the lawsuit to access public records about court schedules. He had befriended a clerk in the filing office, buying her coffee and asking seemingly innocent questions about attorney schedules and courthouse procedures. "He was gathering intelligence," Morrison explained to Rodriguez. "He knew exactly when Ms. Chun would be here, which elevator she would use, and where she was going. This wasn't a chance encounter or a moment of anger. This was a planned attack." The clerk, 23-year-old Angela Torres, was devastated when she learned how Delgado had manipulated her. "He seemed like a nice guy who was just trying to understand the legal process," Torres told investigators through tears. "I never imagined he would use the information to hurt someone." Rodriguez's investigation also uncovered Delgado's extensive criminal history, which painted a disturbing picture of escalating violence against women. His first assault conviction had involved an ex-girlfriend who had tried to leave him. The second case was a road rage incident where he had attacked a female driver after a minor fender bender. The restraining order that Sarah had mentioned during the attack was real and had been issued just 3 weeks earlier. Jennifer Martinez, Sarah's client, had obtained the order after Delgado had followed her home from work and threatened her family. The order specifically prohibited Delgado from having any contact with Martinez or her legal representatives, including Sarah. By violating the restraining order to attack Sarah, Delgado had committed a felony that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in prison. But the assault charges were even more serious, and prosecutors were considering additional charges related to the stalking behavior. District Attorney Michael Thompson personally took charge of the case after reviewing Rodriguez's initial report. Thompson was known for his aggressive prosecution of violence against women, and he saw Sarah's case as an opportunity to send a strong message about the consequences of intimidating victims and their advocates. This wasn't just an assault, Thompson told the media during a press conference 2 days after the incident. This was a calculated attempt to use violence and intimidation to obstruct justice. Mr. Delgado tried to silence an attorney who was representing his victims, and he chose to do it through physical violence. Thompson announced that his office would be filing charges of aggravated assault, stalking, intimidation, and violation of a protective order. If convicted on all charges, Delgado faced up to 15 years in prison. But the case took an unexpected turn when Delgado's attorney, Robert Hayes, announced that his client would be filing a civil lawsuit against Sarah for excessive force. Hayes argued that while Delgado's initial actions were wrong, Sarah's response had been disproportionate to the threat she faced. "My client made a serious mistake in approaching Ms. Chin," Hayes told reporters. "But breaking someone's arm in 2 places is not a reasonable response to being grabbed. Ms. Chan is trained in martial arts and could have easily escaped without causing permanent injury." This development forced Sarah to hire her own attorney, something she had never expected when she decided to specialize in civil rights law. She chose Rebecca Martinez, a former prosecutor who specialized in self-defense cases. Martinez immediately began building a case that would demonstrate not only the legality of Sarah's actions, but also the necessity of her response. She hired Dr. Stephen Brooks, a forensic psychologist who specialized in threat assessment, to analyze the security footage and evaluate the level of danger Sarah had faced. Dr. Brooks's analysis was comprehensive and damning for Delgado's case. Ms. Chan was facing an imminent threat of serious bodily harm from a much larger attacker who had demonstrated planning and premeditation, Brooks concluded. Her response was textbook self-defense, using the minimum force necessary to stop the threat. Brooks also analyzed Delgado's criminal history and psychological profile, concluding that his violence against women had been escalating over time. Based on his pattern of behavior, there's a significant probability that Mr. Delgado would have seriously injured Ms. Chen if she hadn't defended herself effectively. The media attention surrounding the case began to attract national interest when security footage of the incident was leaked to television news outlets. The video clearly showed Sarah's defensive actions, and public opinion quickly shifted in her favor. Women's rights organizations rallied to Sarah's defense, with the National Organization for Women issuing a statement supporting her right to defend herself against violent attacks. Sarah Chen did what every woman should have the right to do when faced with a violent assault, the statement read. She used her training and skills to protect herself from serious harm. Martial arts experts who viewed the footage praised Sarah's technique and restraint. Master David Kim, Sarah's former karate instructor, told reporters that Sarah had actually shown remarkable control during the encounter. Sarah could have seriously injured this man, much more than she did, Kim explained. She used a basic joint lock that's designed to control an attacker, not to cause maximum damage. The severity of his injury was caused by his own resistance to the technique. The controversy intensified when it was revealed that 314 people had now come forward claiming to have witnessed some aspect of the incident or its aftermath. This number included everyone from janitors and security guards to judges and attorneys who had heard about the case through courthouse gossip. Each witness provided slightly different details, but all supported the basic facts that Sarah had been attacked without provocation and had defended herself appropriately. The sheer number of witnesses made it impossible for Delgado's attorney to claim that the incident had been misrepresented or taken out of context. Judge Margaret Foster, who presided over the original harassment case, issued a rare public statement about the incident. The intimidation of attorneys representing victims of harassment and discrimination undermines the entire legal system, Foster said. Ms. Chen's right to represent her clients without fear of physical violence is fundamental to the rule of law. As the investigation continued, Rodriguez discovered additional evidence that strengthened the case against Delgado. Phone records showed that he had called Sarah's office repeatedly in the weeks leading up to the attack, hanging up whenever someone answered. Credit card records proved he had purchased a knife just days before the incident, though he hadn't brought it to the courthouse due to security screenings. The knife purchase was particularly troubling because it suggested Delgado had been planning an even more serious attack. If he had successfully gotten the weapon past courthouse security, the confrontation could have ended with Sarah's death rather than Delgado's broken arm. Dr. Williams updated her medical report after Delgado's surgery, confirming that the injury would result in permanent disability. The patient will require extensive physical therapy and multiple follow-up surgeries, she wrote. Full recovery is unlikely, and he will experience chronic pain and limited mobility in the affected arm for the rest of his life. This medical evidence became central to Hayes' civil case against Sarah, but it also strengthened the criminal case against Delgado. Prosecutors argued that the severity of his planning and the potential consequences of his attack justified the force Sarah had used to defend herself. As both sides prepared for what promised to be a highly publicized trial, Sarah found herself at the center of a national debate about self-defense, gender equality, and the right of women to protect themselves from violent men. The quiet attorney who had simply been trying to get to work on time had become an unwilling symbol for millions of women who had faced similar threats. The legal battle was just beginning, and Sarah knew that the outcome would affect not only her own future, but also the rights of countless other women who might someday find themselves in similar situations. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in January, for months after the courthouse attack. Judge Patricia Harrison presided over proceedings that had attracted media attention from across the country. The courtroom was packed with reporters, women's rights advocates, legal observers, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case through months of pre-trial coverage. Sarah walked into the courthouse wearing the same navy blazer she had worn on the morning of the attack, a deliberate choice made by her attorney Rebecca Martinez to remind the jury of her client's professionalism and peaceful intentions. Photographers captured every step as Sarah climbed the courthouse stairs, now accompanied by 2 security guards assigned to protect her from threats that had poured in from Delgado supporters. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. District Attorney Michael Thompson began with the security footage, playing the attack from 4 different camera angles in slow motion. The jury watched in silence as Delgado grabbed Sarah from behind, his size advantage clearly visible on the large courtroom screens. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson told the jury during his opening statement, "you will see a planned, premeditated attack on an attorney who was simply trying to do her job. The defendant didn't just wake up that morning and decide to confront Ms. Chin. He stalked her, learned her schedule, and waited in ambush like a predator hunting prey." Thompson called 17 witnesses during the first week of testimony. Courthouse security guard Frank Morrison explained how Delgado had gained access to Sarah's schedule through weeks of reconnaissance. Janitor Miguel Santos described hearing Sarah's voice calling for security and arriving to find Delgado writhing on the floor with his arm bent at an impossible angle. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Patricia Williams, the emergency room physician who had treated Delgado. She used anatomical models to show the jury exactly what had happened to Delgado's arm, explaining how the spiral fracture had occurred. The injury pattern is consistent with a joint lock technique applied by someone with extensive martial arts training, Dr. Williams testified. However, the severity of the fracture was caused primarily by the victim's own resistance to the technique. If Mr. Delgado had not struggled against the hold, the injury would have been much less severe. This testimony proved crucial because it undermined Delgado's civil case against Sarah. The medical evidence showed that Sarah had used appropriate force, and that Delgado's injuries had been worsened by his own actions. Defense attorney Robert Hayes struggled to present a coherent case for his client. His strategy focused on portraying Delgado as a man who had made a terrible mistake, but didn't deserve the severe consequences he was facing. Hayes argued that Delgado's actions, while wrong, had been motivated by desperation rather than malicious intent. Marcus Delgado is not a monster, Hayes told the jury. He's a man who made a series of bad decisions that led to a moment of poor judgment. Yes, he approached Ms. Chun inappropriately, but he never intended to cause her serious harm. He was trying to talk to her about dropping the case against him. But this defense fell apart when Thompson presented evidence of Delgado's extensive planning and his purchase of a knife just days before the attack. Hayes couldn't explain why his client needed a weapon for a simple conversation. The prosecution also called Dr. Stephen Brooks, the forensic psychologist who had analyzed Delgado's behavior patterns. Brooks testified that Delgado showed classic signs of escalating violence against women, and that his attack on Sarah fit a predictable pattern of increasing aggression. Based on Mr. Delgado's history and the evidence of premeditation, I believe Ms. Chin was in immediate danger of serious bodily harm, Brooks told the jury. His pattern of behavior suggests that this attack would have escalated to much more serious violence if Ms. Chen hadn't defended herself effectively. The most dramatic moment in the trial came when Sarah herself took the stand. Martinez had prepared her carefully for this moment, knowing that the jury needed to see Sarah as a real person rather than just a legal symbol. Sarah spoke quietly but clearly as she described the morning of the attack. She explained her martial arts training and her decision to learn self-defense techniques after a frightening experience in college. She detailed the split-second decisions she had made when Delgado grabbed her, emphasizing that her only goal had been to stop his attack. "I never wanted to hurt Mr. Delgado," Sarah testified, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I just wanted to get away from him, safely. Everything I did was designed to stop his attack with the minimum force necessary." Under cross-examination, Hayes tried to portray Sarah as someone who had overreacted to a relatively minor threat. He questioned why she hadn't simply tried to run away or call for help instead of using martial arts techniques that she knew could cause serious injury. Sarah's response was devastating to the defense case. "Mr. Hayes, I'm 5 feet 4 inches tall and weigh 120 pounds. Mr. Delgado is over 6 feet tall and weighs more than 200 pounds. He had grabbed me from behind in an empty hallway. Running away wasn't an option because he was faster and stronger than me. Calling for help wouldn't have stopped him from hurting me in the next few seconds." She continued, "My training taught me to use the minimum force necessary to stop an attack. I used a basic joint lock that's designed to control an attacker, not to cause maximum damage. The fact that Mr. Delgado was injured was unfortunate, but it was the direct result of his decision to attack me and then resist when I defended myself." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Delgado. Judge Harrison sentenced him to 8 years in prison, noting the premeditated nature of his attack and his history of violence against women. "Mr. Delgado, you made a calculated decision to use violence and intimidation to obstruct justice," Harrison said during sentencing. "You stalked Ms. Chen, learned her schedule, and waited in ambush to attack her. The fact that she was able to defend herself doesn't diminish the seriousness of your crimes. But the legal proceedings weren't over. Hayes had promised to pursue the civil case against Sarah, arguing that his client deserved compensation for his permanent injuries. This case went to trial 6 weeks after the criminal conviction, with many of the same witnesses testifying again. The civil trial attracted even more attention than the criminal case because it directly addressed the question of how much force a person could use in self-defense. Women's rights organizations packed the courtroom, viewing the case as a test of whether women would be punished for effectively defending themselves against male attackers. Martinez presented an even stronger case in the civil trial, armed with Delgado's criminal conviction and additional evidence that had emerged during the investigation. She revealed that Delgado had made threatening phone calls to 2 other female attorneys in the months before attacking Sarah, establishing a clear pattern of intimidating women in the legal profession. The key moment in the civil trial came when Martinez called Master David Kim, Sarah's former karate instructor, to testify about the techniques Sarah had used. Kim demonstrated the joint lock on a volunteer, showing the jury exactly how the technique worked and why it had been appropriate for the situation Sarah faced. This is one of the first techniques we teach students for escaping from a rear grab, Kim explained to the jury. It's designed to be non-lethal, but effective. The amount of force used depends entirely on how much the attacker resists. Ms. Chen used exactly the right technique for the situation she faced. Kim also addressed the question of whether Sarah could have used less force. Any lesser technique would not have been effective against a man of Mr. Delgado's size and strength. Ms. Chen was facing a life-threatening situation, and she responded with appropriate force. The civil jury returned their verdict after 2 days of deliberation. Not only did they reject Delgado's claim for damages, but they awarded Sarah $50,000 in compensatory damages for the emotional distress and legal expenses she had suffered as a result of his attack. Judge Harrison, who presided over both trials, made an unusual statement after the civil verdict was announced. This case has important implications for self-defense law and the rights of women to protect themselves from violent attacks. Ms. Chen's actions were not only legally justified, but morally correct. She should be praised, not punished, for her courage and skill in defending herself. The aftermath of the trials brought unexpected changes to Sarah's life. She received job offers from major law firms across the country, all wanting to hire the attorney who had become a symbol of women's empowerment. Women's self-defense organizations invited her to speak at conferences and training events. Sarah ultimately decided to start her own practice, specializing in cases involving violence against women and self-defense issues. Her first case involved defending a college student who had been charged with assault after fighting off a would-be rapist, using techniques similar to those Sarah had employed against Delgado. The courthouse where the attack occurred installed new security measures, including additional cameras and panic buttons in every hallway. A plaque was mounted near the 4th-floor elevators, commemorating Sarah's courage and the importance of the right to self-defense. 6 months after the trials ended, Delgado was released on parole due to prison overcrowding and good behavior. His arm had healed poorly despite multiple surgeries, leaving him with limited mobility and chronic pain. He struggled to find employment due to his criminal record and his physical limitations. In a twist that surprised everyone, Delgado eventually reached out to Sarah through his attorney, asking to meet with her. Against the advice of many friends and colleagues, Sarah agreed to the meeting, which took place in Martinez's law office with security guards present. Delgado, looking much older and more frail than he had during the trials, offered a sincere apology for his actions. "I know I can never undo what I did to you," he said, tears in his eyes. "I was angry and desperate, but that's no excuse for violence. You had every right to defend yourself. And I'm sorry you had to go through all this because of my stupidity." Sarah accepted his apology with grace, though she made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the lessons of what had happened. "I hope you understand now why what you did was so wrong," she told him. "Women have the right to work and live without fear of violence. When you attacked me, you weren't just hurting me. You were attacking the principle that women deserve equal treatment under the law." The meeting lasted only 15 minutes, but it provided closure for both parties. Sarah continued building her practice, eventually becoming one of the most respected self-defense attorneys in the country. She never forgot the 3 seconds that changed her life, but she chose to use that experience to help other women find their own strength and courage. The case became a landmark precedent in self-defense law, cited in legal textbooks and court decisions across the nation. Law schools added Sarah's case to their curricula as an example of justified force and the importance of understanding both the legal and practical aspects of self-defense. Years later, when asked about that morning in the courthouse, Sarah would always emphasize the same point. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, but I refused to be a victim. Every woman has the right to defend herself, and society has the responsibility to support that right. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and I hope my experience helps other women understand that they have options when faced with violence." The story of Sarah Chin and Marcus Delgado became more than just a legal case. It became a symbol of the ongoing struggle for women's safety and equality in a world where violence against women remains all too common. And the 314 witnesses who saw justice prevail that day became part of a larger movement toward recognizing and protecting every person's fundamental right to defend themselves against those who would do them harm.